She lived 20 years from her age 75 and died in her 96th year, all cancer-free. To answer the question as to why I became involved in Brilin, I need to go back to 1979. And in that year, my mother had a return of cancer. She had part of the bowel taken out, and it was thought to be successful because of the surgical operation. And it wasn't successful because the cancer returned in the bone marrow, and she was told to take a world trip and wind her affairs up. There was nothing further that could be done. Said to me that there was no point in going back to the doctor. The doctor had told her that there was no hope. I suggested to her that we would be willing in the family circle, one of us, to make sure she could go to an overseas clinic somewhere, and she could choose where. We would look after her, we would look after the finance, we would make sure everything ran smoothly. She said, "No, I'm 75, I've had my life, that's it." I was a wee bit knocked back by that, but my wife and I said to her, "Come and live with us." And on the 30th of September 1979, she arrived and took up residence with us. And we were left with the question as to what we should do. I knew very little about cancer, and in those days there was no internet. No information was available readily. It was very difficult to imagine that anyone would look after somebody with cancer and do something about it. But we were quite determined that we were not going to accept a fatal judgment simply because officialdom had made that judgment. So we decided that we would look after Mum and we would treat her ourselves as best we could. It certainly wasn't a form of practicing medicine without a license because she had been told she would die. So therefore we had absolutely nothing to lose, and we decided that we would take on a doctor role, and that role would be made up as we went along because we didn't know what to do. And we admitted quite openly that we were purely doing the very best we could do in the extenuating circumstances, and that we would do it to the best of our ability. Now, the interesting part of the story is that Mum arrived with a book that she'd been reading about natural health and a natural cure. And we took up the book that she was reading, which happened to be a book that both of us at home had read ourselves, and decided that we would use her ground of what she had already decided might be helpful as a springboard into what we would do with her about it. And it seemed to me to be a first principle to work on what somebody wants to do rather than give them a treatment. So we did this. She had been reading a book on wheatgrass juice, and although wheatgrass juice was not something I'd had any experience with at all, we decided that we would work on what she wanted to do or what she thought might be hopeful. And I brought home a lot of timber, made up wooden trays, filled them with plastic lining, put in seaweed-enriched compost, sowed the wheat into the compost, and grew grass. It grew about 15 centimetres high. I had to wheel it out on a trailer to get an hour or two of sun a day, and we cut it up with an ordinary hand meat mincer, which in those days was the only thing we had available, and we minced out the wheatgrass juice and we gave it to her to drink. And she drank something like half a small glass every day of this wheatgrass juice, because that was where she was coming from and what she believed would be a good thing. Now, I didn't really think that that would be adequate. It didn't seem to me to be the right thing. And it seemed to me that we needed to do something that was far more substantial and far more well-defined than drink wheatgrass juice. However, I did everything according to Mum's belief in the wheatgrass juice that she'd been reading about, and added to the equation an entirely different factor. And the factor that we put into the equation was long-term fasting. And that long-term fasting, Mum agreed, would be an additionally beneficial, overwhelmingly sensible thing to do. I had no experience in looking after people fasting. We didn't know anything about it much, except that I had got books and did some reading, and we got going on the problem. And like any problem, if you get going on the solution, it eventually turns out that you find it. And we started off with Mum having a 1 week light diet, and then a 1 week on water only, with that tiny little bit of wheatgrass juice put into the equation as an extra. And then we had 2 weeks of light diet and 2 weeks on water, 3 weeks of light diet and 3 weeks on water. Then we had 4 weeks of light diet, and we attempted to do 4 weeks on water, and it was finally successful, but only by a very small margin. The problem arose in the 18th week of that 20-week period. And the problem was that Mum had lost confidence in living. She turned over in bed and said, "Let me go." And I said, "No, can you live one more day?" And she said, "Yes," in a very faint and weak way. But it was quite definitely yes. And day by day, every day, I asked her to live one more day, and we kept going from that 18th week through to the end of that 4-week lengthy fast, until she was skin and bone and bedridden, but still able to smile and keep going little by little towards the end of that period of time. Now, the interesting thing about it is that I believed that the body would have the opportunity of pouring energy into a curative process through not using that energy to process food. And it seemed to me that this would be the best thing that we could do in these circumstances, to think of the body's energy being transferred from everyday living into curative work. It was a long journey, and it was a tiring journey. At times it became really exhausting. However, we didn't give up, and we kept at it day by day. I played Scrabble with my mother day after day as something that she liked doing. I arranged with my family circle for letters to be written so that Mum could write and reply. One day in the mail, 5 letters arrived all at once, which was a major surprise, and Mum sat in a chair and said that she didn't feel like doing anything. I gave her the letters and said they needed to be answered, and because her background in journalism enabled her to respond more quickly and more energetically, I gave her a pen, a pad, and she started writing, and she picked herself up. And so we used things like Scrabble, letter writing, and other incidental, what I would call parts of the equation, so that she could get a higher level of confidence and morale. So she had this, and we kept it going. It was not a simple journey at all, because we had, shall we say, every doubt in our own mind as to what we were doing. Don't forget, in those days, as I've just mentioned, there was no information available. There was no such thing as the internet in 1979. However, we kept going. And the important part of the equation, I think, is the fact that we persisted. The story has a really interesting footnote to it, because after a couple of years later, I asked my mother to go back to a doctor and get a cancer check. She had already said from the day she arrived at home she wasn't having anything more to do with the medical people because they could not help her, and they had said so themselves. I said to her, would she please go back and get a cancer clearance for my sake, so that I knew that she was healed. She went back to a doctor. She did the necessary testing, was done, and it was decided that she had a clearance. I asked her at that stage, this was 2 years on, I said, what do you think got you well? And I listed many of the things we had done. Apart from the fasting, we had been very careful about diet, for example. We had collected unfluoridated water. We had made sure we had got clean, chemically free food. We had done lots of things in connection with mental rest and the right stimulation. We made sure she got some little tiny bit of exercise every day until she became bedridden. And we did the best we could to get all the different things fitted together. And I said to her, as I went through the different things we had done, we also used water enemas at that stage. I believe that that was something that was a sensible thing to do. Not knowing one way or the other, right or wrong. We did that as well. And I said, we did all these things, Mum. What do you think got you well? And she gave me an extremely unusual answer. She said, none of those things. And I said, surely not. And she said, well, we needed to do them, but they didn't get me well. I was puzzled. I said to her, what got you well? She answered me and said, your inspiration that I should live. And I believe that that was the driving force that kept her going and was the curative, if you like, component of the entire process. She did get well. From the day that she left, including the 2 years, she lived 20 years further, cancer-free, and died cancer-free of old age in her 96th year. And I believe that we had discovered something, not about what we could do, but more about what people can do in their own personal belief about their own wellness. And I believe my mother's restoration depended on her own commitment, her own persistence, and her own confidence. She was inspired to live, yes, but she lived by that inspiration. And it was a wonderful thing to say that we had discovered something. That dates way, way back. It's now 40 odd years ago. But looking back a much lesser period of time, when the Brilin Centre began, it began in an informal way. I was asked to be a sounding board to help with William's father as he began the project. And I decided that I would help. And I've been a helper with Brilin since its inception. And you're going to say, well, what help can you give? The answer is that there's a strange thing about healing that is very difficult to put your finger on. It's not a matter of giving people treatments at all. It's a matter of finding out what they believe is their direction in life and helping them, encouraging them, and building them, if you like, the strength to walk the pathway that they've chosen. So in many ways, one can get well. But it takes, if you like, a wee bit of thinking out what the subconscious mind reposes in, believes in, rests in, And I believe that that's what my mother taught me. I thought I was teaching her what to do from the tiny bits of knowledge that I put together in that day with the things that we were scraping together piece by piece. I was not teaching her, she was teaching me. And the lesson that she taught me is one that has remained with me and one that I still use at Brilin. If people are inspired to live, they will live. But if people are given treatments, they may or may not. And it is my belief that the Brilin Centre that I joined up with, inadvertently not realising it was going to become a centre, is now, if you like, the same ground that I work with, the same principles. And I believe that my mother lies in the background to that story.